What he was trying to do was trying to inflame, trying to incite, trying to drive a narrative, and to use a tragedy like this, where 3 innocent children are being killed, to use that to peddle this disinformation, to use this to drive hatred against groups, is totally beyond the pale. I have to say, I've seen a lot from Nigel Farage, and generally he sails quite close to the wind. This is far and away in a different category.
Since those awful stabbings in Southport, which left 3 children dead, some figures on the right wing of our politics have been accused of whipping up tensions, which led to last night's riots in Southport outside a mosque in the town against police officers, many of whom were injured. Now, one of those politicians who've been criticised is the newly elected MP for Clacton, Nigel Farage. Let's have a listen to what he said.
Well, it's pretty horrendous. The 3rd young girl has died as a result of the stabbings yesterday in Southport. I obviously join everybody in my horror at what has happened. I know the Prime Minister went to lay flowers and was heckled, and it shows you how unhappy the public are with the state of law and order in our country. I have to say there are 1 or 2 questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question. What I do know is something is going horribly wrong in our once beautiful country.
Well, and those were the thoughts of Nigel Farage, posted on social media. We did invite Nigel Farage to join us and talk to us. We got no reply to that invitation. I am now going to welcome, though, Brendan Cox, who, as I say, is the co-founder of Survivors Against Terror, the widower of the late MP Jo Cox, who was murdered in 2016. Hello to you, Brendan.
Good afternoon.
Having listened there, and you'll have listened and heard it before, to what Nigel Farage has to say, what would you say to that?
What today should have been about the vigil, the thousands of people who went out and laid flowers for Elsie, for Alice, for Bibi, the 3 kids who were killed. It should have been about the 8 children who were stabbed as well, and the other adults who are still fighting for their life. Instead, those streets, you'll have all seen the images, are strewn in wreckage. A mosque has randomly been attacked by a group of thugs. And that has come from somewhere. That hasn't just happened. It has come from people peddling half-truths, mistruths, disinformation. And you expect that. You expect that from the likes of Tommy Robinson, people out on the extreme right. But Nigel Farage is an elected member of Parliament, and with that comes a responsibility. He could have, if he'd wanted answers to the questions, which has been his line of defence today, he could have gone to the House of Commons yesterday and he could have asked those questions. There was an emergency statement on the attack, but he didn't do that. Instead, what he did was he went on to X and he created that video that you've just played the clips from, which weren't a set of questions, they were a set of insinuations. What he was insinuating there was not that we didn't know what was happening and that more information was needed, but that we knew what was happening. The police knew, and it was being kept from us. Yes. And that is one of the things that put fuel on the fire of the tensions that were already existing, and one of the things, I think, that led to the rioting and the violence last night.
And it is worth, I guess, pointing out perfectly objectively that Parliament is there for an MP to ask questions and to get answers from those in authority and positions of power.
Exactly, and that's what I've been saying today. I mean, I think if he had seriously wanted to answer those questions, he could have asked them to people that might know a little bit more than random followers on Twitter, on X. Instead, that wasn't his intention. He wasn't looking for answers to those questions. What he was trying to do was trying to inflame, trying to incite, trying to drive a narrative, and to use a tragedy like this, where 3 innocent children have been killed, to use that to peddle this disinformation, to use this to drive hatred against groups, is totally beyond the pale. I have to say, I've seen a lot from Nigel Farage, and generally he sails quite close to the wind. This is far and away in a different category. This is the reason I called him today Tommy Robinson in a suit, is because this is just a different category of engagement. He has been responsible for putting fuel, as a member of Parliament, putting fuel on the fires of the tensions that already existed. feeding the thuggery. And as a result of that, last night we saw a pogrom against a mosque where the windows were smashed, where bricks were hurled, and there's some responsibility for that. When you're a member of Parliament, you have some responsibility, and frankly, I think it's disgraceful that he could think about defending those comments as he's tried to do today, to say that they're just questions. They're not questions. They're very clear insinuations. He knew what he was doing.
Right, well, so that indictment from you couldn't be clearer. And I want to repeat, Nigel Farage has been invited to come onto the programme, and you're welcome on, Nigel Farage. Come on and answer those points made there by Brendan Cox at any point. We will open the door. There's a microphone waiting for you here. Meanwhile, Brendan Cox, fears of immigration being associated or to blame for crime are not uncommon, and not just among right-wing commentators and activists. How should they be answered? How should facts and perspectives be inserted into that discussion?
So let's be clear. I think we don't know enough about this individual.
I'm speaking in general terms.
In general terms, it is completely legitimate to have a debate about the levels of immigration, to have a debate about the upsides and the downsides to that immigration, to talk about whether the people we're accepting have been vetted well enough, whether there are risks associated with some of the procedures we have for letting people into the country. That is all entirely fair game. It is a political debate that we should have, and is not racist to have that conversation. It's not far right to have that conversation. It's part and parcel of running a country, making sure we have adequate control of our borders. What isn't legitimate is to blame random attacks that you don't know any of the details on immigrants just because of the colour of their skin, or just because of something that you've seen online that you then repeat.
Yes.
And that's where we've ended up in the last few days. And that takes away from the legitimate debate about, do we have the safeguards in place? What is our immigration policy? Is it the right policy? Are the numbers that are coming to the country at the moment sustainable? All of that is entirely legitimate. We should have that debate. The problem that happens is that bits of that far right so racialise that debate and so pour prejudice into that debate, it becomes very hard to have that conversation properly. So I am entirely in favour of having those difficult conversations around immigration, the levels of immigration, the procedures around immigration, the processes around it. What I'm not in favour of is using immigration as a fig leaf, debates around immigration as a fig leaf for debates which are actually about racism.
Okay, now, let me just put this to you. It's coming from our listener, Nat. And it picks up on some of the points you're making there, Brendan. And Nat says, I'm now going to quote, he says, the fact that it remains, he's talking about social media, almost entirely unregulated is shocking. It's like leaving live ammunition next to everyone's bed and thinking nothing could go wrong. And he says, governments have got to realise the cost of social media to wellness in society has become too great to ignore. It needs addressing with the same seriousness and ministerial responsibility as we do any other all-pervasive and powerful economic and social force. So I think he's picking up on a point you're making there, and then begs the question, what to do about that? What more can and should be done by way of regulation?
So I think that's entirely right. I think, that we're able to be in a environment where people are able to peddle half-truth, mistruth and disinformation with no comeback at all, and not just random members of the public, but members of Parliament in this case, and high-profile people with millions of followers. Something has to shift in that. There has to be some responsibility for these platforms to take responsibility for what they are promoting. And let's be clear that the thing here is that this isn't just about a neutral platform which is putting out information, if you like, a sort of a platform that's neutral to the content. Yep. The way that the algorithms work is they promote particular people, if you paid for a subscription, for example, and they promote content which is more extreme, more likely to get engagement. And so what that means is they're creating that content, and that comes with responsibility. At the moment, those responsibilities are being avoided and evaded, and I hope this government does more, particularly on this area, because I do think, as your listener was just saying, we'll look back on this period as a sort of unregulated Wild West, the period when we were sending our kids down coal mines or giving them cigarettes at age 12. We'll catch up to this. Society will catch up. We'll realise the harm that social media can do as well as the good that it can do. It will end up being better regulated in the medium term, but government needs to move quickly, because in this gap, real harm is done, and we saw that harm on the streets of Southport yesterday.
All right, Brendan, thank you for your thoughts. Brendan Cox there.